Great to have your company once again on the marketplace. This is the show that you need to watch during the NBL free agency period. If you missed the first episode, jump online and check it out now. We spoke about all of the big names to watch, some potentially massive names to return to the league. And we started to take a look at each team by team, what it looks like and some of the big decisions that they need to make. I'm Jack Heverin. Olgun Ulic is, of course, the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball. Olgun, the next few teams that we're going to talk about, there are some teams with some big challenges ahead of them.
And as we showed in episode 1, we could talk about this stuff forever. So I like this. I like getting into detail with all this stuff. I'm excited.
Pete Hawley, some of the younger names I think will get more of a feature today as well, with some interesting decisions on their future.
Yeah, it's exciting, right? Again, we alluded to it in episode 1 where these conversations can be years in planning, whether it's college kids, whether it's DPs who are potentially getting elevated. There's just so much moving and shaking that, yes, you're trying to win a title right now. Yes, you're trying to play the best basketball you can. But while you're doing that, the business side of pro sports never sleeps, and all those things continue to work.
Derek Rucker, we got some things to talk about.
You need stars. You got to have stars. And I want to see who lands the big ones and possibly where they may go.
NBL.com.au, as we mentioned, of course, don't forget to go back and check out episode number 1. But let's start episode 2 in the West with the Perth Wildcats.
There is a lot of guys up for grabs when you look at the Perth Wildcats, who they have under contract. And obviously, Almanza, all next star deals are 2-year deals, so you see him there as being under contract. And we talked about Bryce Cotton in length in the first one, so maybe he's not the best one to allude to start this. You can go back and watch episode 1 to see all the chat about Bryce. The big one for me off that, I mean, there's youngsters in there, and again, I think Pepper, the club option, is something you'd definitely try and pick up. You want to keep Pepper, you want to keep that young nucleus going forward, especially we'll talk about Ben Henschel, what happens with him. Christian Doolittle, they got him done very early. Last time to keep him back this year, he had the groin injury, but he's come back looking probably even better than he did on the offensive end especially. He's one for me that if you're looking at what can we build going forward, what can we guarantee being there with Bryce Cotton still alluding around with the question mark what's happening there. He's phenomenal in the NBL, and I'd love to see him there on a long-term deal if they could get it done.
So the team has been talking with him and his representatives for a good amount of time on trying to lock him into a long-term deal of some sort. Now, so far, nothing has been agreed on or anything like that, but they've been doing their best. They want to lock him in on a long-term deal. From what I understand, they're also trying to sell citizenship to him. Like, hey, you like it here, your family likes it here, let's see what we can do here. So far, he hasn't budged. I still think he wants to explore what his professional career looks like. I know that Puerto Rico is something that he's interested in, teams around Europe and Japan and whatnot, but there's someone who they have a really keen interest in keeping, which I get from a defensive standpoint. He's awesome. His offensive package this season has been great. But so far, nothing done yet.
The citizenship enticing from Perth.
Probably haven't had a great track record with that
probably
one.
Be using that one. But it makes sense, though. I mean, that was a Bryce Cotton's, that's a very unique situation. But absolutely, you can see him in long term.
Well, the other big one is Keanu Pinder. What happens there? And a guy who's been up and down this season, but we know he has the potential to play at a high level. I love the pairing with Doolittle, and Doolittle is a pro who's continuing to improve as a player. You see the development occurring on the offensive end. He's physical, he rebounds the basketball well, but could his improvement actually open the door for the Wildcats to look away from Keanu Pinder?
Keanu Pinder is someone who I can see eventually being priced out of the NBL. And what I mean by that is he's on a substantial contract right now. I don't know if there are teams around the league who would be keen on giving him that sort of number. He still warrants a high number. That may be not what he's on currently. Teams around Europe and Asia are probably those teams that can meet that. So it would make sense, and I don't think anyone would be crying over it. A mutual split after this season feels like something that's probably on the cards, and it'd surprise me if he's back in the NBL just because of the money that I think is out there for him.
Ben Henschel, if you run Ben Henschel's numbers, I don't think he's going to win the most improved, but he certainly warrants being as part of a pool of players. It feels like he's almost ready to go, doesn't it? It feels like he's ready to really explode and take an opportunity. Do we think that opportunity will be in Perth?
I mean, it could be. They have a really strong interest in keeping him. Obviously, he's a Perth kid. They want to keep him there. When you look at some of the glimpses we've seen this season, not just glimpses, like there have been extended stretches of really good basketball. Some of the quarters he's had of, getting, the Chris Golding type moments where it's getting 12 points in 2 minutes sort of things. And his ability to shoot the ball, he's someone worth watching because He'll obviously go through the pre-draft process, so we'll see what that looks like for him. Is there a team that drafts him? If they draft him, do they stash him? Is he a two-way candidate? We'll see what happens there. He has to go through that process first. And then teams around the league are interested in him. Obviously, you look at him as not just a potential high-level backup guard, but there are some teams that might think, can we start him and put high-level talent around him and trust the shooting and trust the offensive skill package there? And then it's not just other teams around the NBL, it's also college. There are a lot of colleges that are looking at guys like Ben Henschel, even guys like Rocco. We'll see what his pre-draft process looks like too, but they're looking at these guys with a substantial amount of money, as in high-level import money in the NBL. That's like the NIL money that these guys can get over in college. I'm sorry, Pete. I don't know what Albany could have offered you, just like a gift voucher or something. But there's a ton of money in college that could be enough to sway some of these guys back to school.
And Ogun, he's got a live body. He's an athlete. He can go up. He can push the ball in transition. He hasn't shown a good shooting clip yet, but you can see it's there. He has a technique. It's going to come. But the thing that I like is he's hungry. You can see that he wants to be better as a basketball player. And, of course, the high level of confidence.
The college avenue potentially is fascinating for a guy who's had these moments already playing against men in a very highly regarded league around the world.
He'd be so good.
But
Really
then
good.
whatever college that would be, yes, the NIL money is one thing, but this is a guy who wants to get to the NBA. Does that pathway help him get there? Depending on the workout, how it all goes. But the fact he's even eligible, the way the new rules have changed.
NIL has really sort of made everything malleable, right? Anything's possible at this point.
But it's interesting in terms of the confidence side of things, of like you're going back to then play against everyone your age and you've already probably exceeded them improvement-wise or where you're at. So I look at it from a Ben Henschel perspective, and if he goes there and averages 20-plus a game doing all of that, does that put him in a better eyes from an NBA team than it would be contributing the way he's doing here?
And that's the question with the NBL. If he finds a situation that suits him, whether it's Perth or whether it's someone else, and they say, look, we're going to look to play you 2025, you may even start potentially, does that suit him better than going back to college?
And that's the value proposition that someone has to weigh up. Do you go and, like Ben Henschel, the way he's played this season and working out with Bryce Cotton every day, he'll go to a high-level D1 and he'll average 18, 20 points a game, right? That is really, really impressive. Is that better in the eyes of NBA people than being in the NBL and averaging 10 points a game on a decent shooting clip and guarding pros every day? That's the value proposition that these guys will have to make.
Well, my evaluation would be that averaging 10 to 12 on a high-level NBL team is more impressive than averaging 15 to 17 points in a college game. It is much more intelligent playing at a pro level. You're dealing with physicality. You're dealing with individual accountability on a daily basis. College, they're beating you over the head, Pete. You got to show up here. You got to show up here. And that's not how it is in the NBA. To see a guy mature enough to be able to handle his own at 20, 21 years of age is very impressive.
So Danny Mills may very well be the busiest man during the free agency period. And Danny, good luck. You've got some work to do. Pete, I'm not sure Chris Pongras will be as busy. The Sydney Kings, it looks like, are going to be more about decisions as opposed to filling a roster.
Yeah, big time. I mean, we look at the comparison from this potential off-season to what they had to go last year, and they were extremely busy, very productive last year in the off-season to lock this away. I mean, to have guys like Cooks, Qual, Noy, Leah Pepe, Galloway as well, they've got so much to work with already going forward. So then it becomes you kind of sit back and we mentioned in the first episode, some massive names. Can you lure a Duop Breath back to kind of join that? You've got so many things to work with. The key for me is obviously going to be Jalen Adams. And we said this last time after he won MVP. Can they keep him? It didn't eventuate. They went and got Derek Walton Jr. Still worked out okay. But he's one for me that we've seen it time and time again. He's had a little bit of back injury this year, but at his best, I mean, in terms of in the fourth quarter, there's not many I'm taking over Jalen Adams.
And he's taken his game to a new level since the FIBA break. And I think, when you look at that Sydney Kings organization, Jalen Adams, along with Xavier Cooks, they're at the front. They're the faces of it. But it's a precarious situation when you have an import in that situation, when you're looking for continuity. And I don't know what it looks like for Jalen beyond this year. Certainly the talent says yes, but it's whether or not they feel like as a team they get enough leadership. They get the consistent performances and effort from Jalen Adams game to game. That's probably going to decide whether Brian Goorjian brings him back or not.
The key has been listening to Brian Goorjian all season long. which is he wanted another guard next to Jalen Adams. And I think he determined that pretty early. And so is this Sydney Kings team one that says, all right, we've had one season of this group. Now let's see what are the little things we need to fill in. And so does that mean getting maybe a different type of big man to Cam Oliver? Like, are you getting someone who maybe fits Gorge's style a bit more? Do you then
Like a rebounding first kind of guy, is that what you're saying?
think of like I'm not saying they'll get him, but like a Tanner Groves type, where it's someone with like a high work rate, can shoot it a little
Low
bit.
usage.
So that sort of connective big maybe works a little bit better. Is that something they're looking at? And then you look at the guard spots. They try to get Lamonte Turner mid-season. Do they go all in on 2 guards to start the season? You can keep Jalen Adams, and then do you put a point guard next to him? Like that's where I think this team will go. And then the potential of getting a high-level big man maybe shifts that a little bit, because at that point then you have, let's say a marquee level big, and then Xavier Cooks is someone you have to marquee. Bull Cole is someone you have to marquee. You can theoretically then only get 1 import. So you can't get your 2 imports unless you eat the entirety of one of those marquee contracts. You'd assume it'd be Bull or that big. So they have some contractual things that they have to maneuver and work with the mechanisms in play to make that happen. But I don't think they would starve Gorge of getting 2 import point guards or 2 import guards. It seems like that's what he wants.
Is there a possibility that Sydney and Cam Oliver work together again next season, or is that ship pretty much already sailed?
Look, the thing is, anything is possible when we determine the outcome of the season. If you win a championship, man, like anything's possible. Like, I wouldn't have expected Jordan Crawford back in Tasmania, and then he went off for whatever he did in Game 5 of that championship series, and it's like, man, like, maybe we should bring this guy back, because he had some iffy situations throughout those playoffs. And so we'll have to wait and see what the outcome is. But it does seem like this team, seeing what they've got and saying, all right, maybe a different type of player maybe works next season for that position.
Well, Pete, I talked about constructing your team to be able to perform defensively. And when you look at some of the outs this season, and when you think that they'll be back in the lineup, the Kings will be built for defensive success for years to come. But it's offensively, how do they be less patchy next season and kind of ensure more success and efficiency on that end? Because that's been the downfall this year. If we're saying this season hasn't quite met expectations yet.
Well, they're still the best defensively rated team in the competition, which is staggering to think. They've had so many questions all season long that we keep talking about on broadcast of what's wrong here, it's not working here, but they're still sitting very pretty for a sake. And history will tell us, and we'll find out in the finals, that defense is going to win a title. And in the last 14 years, it's been, I think it was the 2011 Breakers who have finished 5th, I believe, or 6th defensively rated, were the last ones outside of a top 3 defensively rated team to win a chip. They're on the right path.
The other name there was Isaiah Liafa. That's a mutual option. Does he seem as though he's surplus to requirements for this Sydney team? Does it seem as if it would be beneficial for both of them to go in a different direction?
It seems, we talked about the logjam in certain areas and what Brian Gorge has been talking about in the press conference of having a true ball handler alongside a scoring 2-guard like Jalen Adams, be able to move him off the ball. Well, that puts the logjam even further down for a guy like Isaiah Liafa, who I think can definitely contribute on teams around the league. There would be teams who would be thinking, if that option's not picked up or not exercised, well, Isaiah Liafa is someone we can go after and when free agency hits.
And I'll say this, because the Kings are largely built for next season, the majority of that core is locked in. I think it's down to the coaching staff and some of the players to come together and figure out what they do with their offense. They've been a bottom 4 offense all season long. They still are right now. It's been below average all season. They need to figure out ways. They need to figure out how to maximize Xavier Cooks, because he's not utilized correctly in this offense. Gorge offenses haven't been great over his time in the NBL. They need to figure out ways to lock in on that. Does that mean getting another import point guard next to Jalen Adams? Maybe that helps it, but that's, I think, priority number 1 this offseason.
Speaking of import point guards, we didn't have him in our names to watch, but he is an enormous name that figures for the New Zealand Breakers. His name is Parker Jackson Cartwright. There's a world where he and Derek Rucker weren't best of friends. Now they're real tight. Now they're really, really, really tight. Interesting, as we go to record today, Matt Walsh spoke in the media over the last couple of days and said they're preparing the biggest offer again in New Zealand Breakers history to retain Parker Jackson Cartwright. And he spoke about some trust issues with PJC and the NBL. What do we make of this situation as we sit here today?
I get the sense that Parker Jackson Cartwright is enjoying his time in the NBL. This is a league that he enjoys being a part of. I don't know if that future is with New Zealand. I would doubt that it's with New Zealand. Just based on this season, all of the ups and downs through that franchise, it is very tough to see him returning. He's the type of player who we would all like to see back in the NBL. I think there's a chance that happens. It would surprise me if it's with New Zealand.
Because it's an interesting one to look at of, again, if he becomes a free agent when free agency hits, the teams that potentially have his name on the whiteboard as being option number one. I mean, you talked about what happens with Brisbane Bullets and James Bateman. If you slide PJC into the starting point guard spot, you can go after and get him. But this is an MVP caliber player. We
He'd be
saw
handy
it.
in Perth if Bryce leaves too.
We saw it,
Yeah.
right? We saw it and what he's worth, what he's capable of doing. So there's going to be potential guys to go after. I understand them offering whatever the highest offer is for Breakers from Matt Walsh, but you're sitting down with him saying, look, what went wrong this year from our point of view, what went wrong on the floor? How do we correct that going forward? And if you have any idea that you want to come back and be with the Breakers, what do we have to do to make that a successful team? Who do you need to play with? When you have key guys, there's the Bryce Cottons probably before, or even this year, it's like, how do we build around you to make your job a little easier, but to give you the best potential platform to showcase your best basketball? You sit down, put it all on the table, and if that's how you can come to an agreement for him to stay, but otherwise, there's going to be plenty of teams that have a crack.
But they did that.
I know.
They did that, and then they tore it apart.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what happened.
I know.
And like
It's all self-inflicted, all this, isn't it?
They re-signed Parker so quickly last offseason. He was the first, I think he might have been the first signing, definitely the first import signing of last season. And they built a team around him that looked like it was going to work. Jonah Bolden was this shooting big, and brought in Mitch McCarron as a backup combo, and Harvey King as a shooter. Everything was there, and they were 7-3. And then obviously the Freddie Gillespie thing happened. They moved off him, brought in Taco, and it just wasn't the style of play that fit Parker Jackson Cartwright. And it's what are you here to do as a franchise? Are you here to try to maximize your best player and win games, or are you trying to bring in players who bring in crowds? Like, what's your preference?
And I think one of the difficulties that New Zealand will face as a franchise is how do they get Parker's spirit back? Yeah. Because when that transaction was made, he became dispirited over time. We know he had the incident where he was suspended for some time also. But I still maintain that outburst had a lot more to do with other things that were going on in the Breakers ecosystem. And I have no insight. That's just the eye test. But, did you feel Parker looked different emotionally
Frustrated.
in the second half of the season?
I mean, for sure, when you're going in and you're the second team in the league, top two team before all the changes happen, and when you're a competitor like he is, and you look at the way that he played even prior to that, the joy that he plays, the trash talking to you last year, but that was all part of that competitive drive, and he was still smiling at the end of the day for all of that. When then you flip that suddenly into a team that is getting blown out, struggling to win, even since he's come back from suspension, I give him credit for the way he's playing. He's not forcing anything. He could have come back saying, you know what, I'm still a premier guard in the league, which he is. I'm still an all-NBL caliber player this season, which he is. But he's really just kind of going through, getting other guys involved, trying to buy into a thing that he didn't sign up for.
He plays the right way.
He does, and I would love to see him in the league. I think it will be hard for New Zealand probably to try and mend that, but you can never say never.
And last thing on Parker, there were whispers at the end of last season that Parker wouldn't be against playing in a big market franchise in the NBL. I don't know if that's still the case right now. That was the case last season. If that is the case, then there are some big market franchises that would have openings at the point guard spot who I think he'd slot really nicely into.
Well, the bottom line, he's an LA kid. Big market, bright lights do not scare him.
He's got off-court interests, he just dropped an album, so he's a different sort of character. Maybe that fits a bigger market better.
Two names while we're talking about New Zealand. One is Matt Mooney. Have we seen enough, probably in the second half of the season, to go again there?
I like Matt Mooney. I think he's been super effective, given the circumstances as well. He's been the one consistent. He's been the constant that's helped carry this team. The foul trouble has been obviously an issue, but I appreciate the passion that he has when he does foul out. He cares. He's been a really quality player. That was a really good pickup, albeit in very awkward circumstances in New Zealand.
And then the other name on that list, which is inescapable because he's 7'6", is Taco Fall, player option, which hasn't been widely reported. Everything that most people have read is it's just a straight 2-year deal. It's not. There's a player option. Yes, no, maybe.
I got to interact with Taco during before the Brisbane game when they played up there, and I just felt really bad about the whole dynamic. I have a new empathy for him because his whole life is a circus show. People always walking up to him, you know, measuring themselves against him. And I felt for him. And then when you couple that with coming into a franchise that made the wrong decision in bringing you in, and it leads to basically the disintegration of your season, and you're copping all this media blame, it is not his fault. All players are seeking opportunities. The blame has to go with the decision. And it's a tough one, and I hope that he's able to move on somewhere else where he can find more success. But I can't see any success with Taco Fall being at the New Zealand Breakers.
I felt for him tremendously this season for that exact reason. Because of the move, the timing of it, where the team was, just the fact that inevitably human nature that his name's brought up when you talk about the fall off of New Zealand Breakers, it is not his fault. It is not his fault, and he's a terrific human being as well. Speaking to all the players there, speaking to Pettery, like this is an outstanding human being that you want as part of your franchise. It's just the timing of it all, the way it went down, and everybody now is saying, well, we were a better team before we had Taco, and you just put his name in there when it doesn't have to be, because there was so much more that went down for that sake. So that really hurts me to see. It was a great chat you had with him. You said you were 6'3", that was a lie.
That
but
was a
besides
total lie.
that, I think it's...
Come on, Derek.
He's shown, in recent weeks though, he has shown, that game in Melbourne in particular, he was just drawing fouls left, right and centre. So they've kind of figured out how to play with him. It's always going to be tough here in the NBL, especially with certain teams that, this year in particular, that want to play really fast. 4 years ago, when the teams were slowing it right down, like Tassie's first year, when everyone was slowing it right down, you're really just slugging it out. He might have had a lot more of a bigger impact then than he is now when you've got the Hawks who are pushing the pace at every opportunity. It's hard when you're 7'6".
In a vacuum, Taco Fall has actually been a really effective player.
Yeah.
It's just whether you can sustain that as a team over the course of an entire game, which I think the outcomes have shown that you can't do that. From what I understand, we probably won't have Taco Fall in the NBL next season. That feels like what's going to end up happening. He'll more than likely go on to something else.
There's uncertainty with the New Zealand Breakers. Halls, there is total uncertainty with the Cairns Taipans right now, and I think it's worth starting with the coach.
Yeah, out of contract 40. And again, you talk about Cairns, you have to talk about a club that's in a more unique position than anybody else. Small market team, their budget. I mean, you don't have to look too far if you really don't understand the ins and outs of it. I mean, you mentioned Perth's salary cap spend of approaching nearly $4 million. You just look at teams who have replaced injured guys this season. Cairns can't do that. Cairns aren't at the luxury where they've lost key guys. Everyone but Jonah Antonio has missed games. See, Taron Armstrong missed bulk games. Tanner Groves did. Bradshaw did his ankle. Wardenberg's had some hiccups. But any time you see a guy, an import like Tanner Groves, on any other team get ruled out for 6 to 8 weeks, any other team is bringing someone in. Cairns aren't able to do that. 40's done a tremendous job. The 2 wins, they had the Giant Killers on the weekend, but to keep the camaraderie up, to keep everybody competing at a high level, even through the 15-game losing streak. They had multiple games that they should have won. They just fell apart mentally. But 40 has been a catalyst in what he's built there. And it's weird to even envision a Cairns Taipans team without him at the helm right now.
I said it for many years that it was a perfect match, Adam Ford and the Cairns Taipans, and we don't know what the future holds. But I really maintain that this has probably been his strongest year as a coach in the NBL, and the numbers aren't going to support me in any regard. But when you look at the development and how some of those players have come along throughout the course of the season when they've been healthy, and the fact that they always play hard. They always play hard, and that's one of the key indicators to how successful a coach is.
I'll take exception with this being his best coaching performance. The season where they were basically a game, almost like a half away from getting to a championship series. They recruited their imports extremely well. They had Keanu Pinder at the sort of peak of his powers. Sam Wardenberg was showing what he was doing bull call. So that was an awesome season for them. And unfortunately, that was an anomaly. It's very difficult to do. Everything has to go right. Everything has to click for a season like that, because otherwise they've been largely losing seasons in Cairns. Now, it's been an open secret since the start of this season that this would more than likely be 40's last season in Cairns. Now, you can stretch it back even to the end of last season when Sam Wardenberg signed a 1-year extension. From what I understand, he signed that knowing that that's definitely the amount of time that 40 would still be in that franchise for, and beyond that was uncertain. Now, as this season began, it became sort of common knowledge around the league that 40 would more than likely look ahead to bigger and better things after his contract was over, and that the team was looking at someone like Kerry Williams as someone who could potentially come in and step up as head coach. That's what this team is probably looking at, and so that's at the forefront. Once they get that decided, then they can look at this roster, which has no one contracted right now outside of Cody Statman and Alex Higgins-Stitcher.
And it's important to note that you don't have any emotional decisions being made. Throughout this, what's been a very tough season for both Cairns and 40 as well, it's easy to sit there and you're on a 15-game losing streak and say, okay, let's look forward to the future. It's more of, okay, now they're starting to play some great basketball. Let's get to the end of the season. Let's take a deep breath and let's just go back and just look and evaluate the season and then see where we go at going forward. Because I agree. I think he's been unbelievable since being at Cairns, but this year in particular, the growth to be able to continue to fight when everything's gone against you, I've admired it a lot.
Sam Wardenberg is for a lot of the seasons looked like their best player. He's certainly got over the second-year blues that he had last season. There is the threat of New Zealand obviously wanting to get more New Zealand players back. He's the sort of guy that would translate to a European style as well. What does his future look like?
Sam Wardenberg it's a very interesting situation because we look in the recent history in Cairns and we see Keanu Pinder, we see Bull Kuo as guys who have, for lack of a better term, graduated from Cairns to a bigger market, to a bigger contract. It doesn't feel like that's necessarily going to be the case this offseason with Sam Wardenberg. From what I understand, he is not against a return to Cairns. So I wouldn't rule that out. I'd actually say that's probably the most likely situation, that he probably goes back to Cairns for at least one more season. Beyond that, there are teams around the league who are very interested. New Zealand is obviously a team that's interested, but you look at Sam Wardenberg, he is a stretch big who has shown the capacity to defend at a high level in stretches. He's got the total package as a big man, but I wouldn't completely rule out a return to Cairns. This isn't someone getting priced out somewhere else.
Well, I think for his future and how he develops as a player, I would advise going back there for another season, because there he gets the chance to start and continue to show his worth and his value, work on certain areas of his game. But if he's going to go to a high-level playoff contender, I don't see him being a starter. He's probably going to have to adjust. He's a sixth or a seventh man, I believe, in a championship-level team. So there's what he needs to wear from a personal perspective, and probably another year or even two at Cairns might be the go.
Yeah, it's all about, I guess, what his goals and aspirations are in the short term as well. So I know he's had the NBA Summer League opportunities. Both were marred by injuries at the time. So he's been through so much, and the timing of the injuries is what's tough. But to see him play like he has recently, nearly had a triple-double in their double overtime win against Perth. I mean, we know how good he can be. And that's why I don't think it would be a bad choice to go back to Cairns, especially if you're watching the rest of the big man landscape thinking, well, that guy maybe after next year will go to Asia or he'll go to Japan. That might open up some of the bigger teams to do it. But maybe that Asian money, Japan money is on his mind too, where another year getting even better at Cairns and putting up the numbers we're seeing now is going to help that offer come.
Let me put up another case. How did DJ Hogue do when he left Cairns? How's Bull Kuo been since he left Cairns? Has Keanu been any better since he left Cairns?
You're saying the grass isn't always greener.
It definitely is not.
That's a good line. You come up. That's good. I think we. That's so good. I think we evaluate Sam Wardenberg differently. I can see him as a starter on a high-level team. I think he's probably a fifth starter, as opposed to right now where he's probably like a top 2 or 3 guy in usage in Cairns. I don't think he's a high usage guy. But can you see him as like a complimentary starter in, say, Sydney, next to like a Xavier Cooks, where the skill set probably matches really well? Can you see him in Melbourne with high-level players around him? I can see him as a fifth starter as opposed to the sort of top 2 usage guy in Cairns.
What about their imports? At times, they've all had impacts. It was Rob Edwards at the start. Tanner Groves is finishing the season really well. And Pedro Bradshaw has been solid around his injuries. What do you think they'll do there?
I'm keeping an eye on Tanner Groves because he's someone who, from what I understand, is signaling that he'd like to remain in the NBL. And I think when you look at the back half of his season, he's shooting the ball at a high clip. He guards at a high clip. He rebounds the ball.
Competes.
He's a high work rate guy. So he's someone who a lot of teams can slot in. We talk about a fourth or fifth starter on a team. It doesn't have to be your best import, but a third import, he ticks a lot of the boxes of what teams are looking for in that sort of spot.
South East Melbourne Phoenix are well and truly in the hunt with 2 rounds to go. They've done it for a lot of the season without Derek Walton Jr., Pete, but as you take a look at their setup for next season, a couple of really good local names, but outside of that, some work to do.
I'm actually fascinated. This is probably the number one team I'm most keen to keep an eye on during the off-season because Josh King has an opportunity now to build a team that he has control over.
Yep. So
this is a team that he's going to go after. You know what type of players he wants, what he's managed to get out of the playing group that he has this year. Second best defensively rated team for a team that started 0-5, but he's going to have his full imprint on it. Now, the mutual option of Nathan Sobey, from what I understand, Olgun, you can allude to it too, that it seems, especially with under Josh King, it seems more likely than not that that's going to be taken up.
If it's not taken up, it would be a renegotiation.
Then he will be a Phoenix player.
It seems like both sides are interested in that.
So that's a key one to watch. Matt Hurt, we spoke about at length in the first episode. So there's a lot to watch there. But to have Glover, Foxwell got extended, Hunter there, you've got some nice pieces to work with. But as I said, the fact that Josh King gets to have control over this now, it's very exciting for a team that's already contending.
Yeah, it's been surprising, this rise, obviously, and a lot of the credit goes to Josh King. But Olgun, I want to ask you, and generally I'm not about going after secondary imports, but I really like Joe Wieskamp. And I think he is important to this team's success. I think he gives you some versatility defensively, and his ability to shoot the basketball, I think he's going to continue to get better. I think at some point in the recruiting process, you must show risk, and that's one player I'm probably going out there and exhibiting some risk to get done.
Now, from what I've been told, there's mild interest in a reunion there, but like Pete said, this is Josh King's opportunity to build a team in his image, and so who is Wieskamp a Josh King sort of guy? I don't necessarily think he is. I think if this team, firstly, they have to figure out what they're going to do with that import point guard spot. I know Derek Walton Jr. enjoys being in Australia. I think there's a chance he remains in Australia in some capacity. Very well could be with the Phoenix, but also could be elsewhere. Once they figure out that point guard position, man, I can think of like a Justin Simon type. Does that not fit what this team needs? And especially, we'll see what happens with Malik Lewis. We'll see if he declares. We'll see what happens there. But he's sort of filled that role of this long athletic wing who can guard at a high level and play up and in. Without him, I don't think they have that. And I think Josh King needs that in order to operate how he wants to operate.
Wieskamp could be one of those, and there's some other players around the league where, similar to Jordan Crawford, where Tassie went after Will McDowell-White. Hey, we'll wait. We do have, there might be a little bit of interest there on both parties, but let's just wait and see what else is out there. But if you're interested and there's nothing that pops up for you, might have that conversation.
And let me say this, and this might open a broader conversation, but there is now, it's a priority now to nail your imports early. And you can't have a situation where you get off an import mid-season, because we've seen this season that the market out there isn't strong. You had Ian Hummer come in for Tasmania. Sydney Kings brought Lamonte Turner in. He wasn't their first option. They had negotiated deals with high-level guys who then backed out last minute and said, no, there's an NBA opportunity here. There's a two-way offer. This team has a third two-way spot that I might get. There's a 10-day opportunity that I might get, so I'll stay over here in the G League. It's very tough to get guys mid-season from an import perspective. The market is really, really weak. And so if you have someone like Joe Wieskamp, who might not be your best option, but you know he's an effective option in the NBL, you're better off maybe getting that than maybe swinging on someone who might not perform well, then you have to replace the mid-season for someone who's not at the level.
That leads to my point, is that there are wins baked into continuity.
Yeah. And having a known commodity at the very least.
Well, speaking of that, Derek Walton Jr. is a known commodity but has had issues with durability this season. Is he the starting point in that point guard position if you're the Phoenix, or are they probably thinking in a different direction?
I genuinely don't know at this point, because the hamstring thing is, it's 2 hamstring injuries this season. The last time he had a hamstring was back when he was with the Clippers. So it was a while ago. I don't think it's an ongoing thing. But it's definitely something that you have to keep an eye on. 2 hamstring injuries in one season for your point guard. You have to question whether or not you keep that guy, because the best ability is availability, right? I know he wants to. I came up with it myself.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I thought of that before. I know Derek Walton Jr. wants to stay in the NBL. And we know he's a high level point guard. Before he got injured, he was playing at such a high level, right, toward the last few games of his regular season. So I wonder if they want to keep him. I can see a world where they do. But at the very least, I think we see Derek Walton Jr. in Australia again.
It wouldn't surprise me again. Everyone had the question mark when they were struggling. Can Walton Jr. and Sobey share a backcourt together? We saw recently under Josh King that they can. Yeah. So they have that conversation there too. But if that doesn't eventuate, you'd also think there's some teams sitting there being like, well, we would love a championship winner, a grand final series MVP leading our charge. So if he became available, if PJC became available, there's a little bit of a carousel for the point guards.
Let's finish with the Adelaide 36ers as we've been breaking it down team by team. The Adelaide 36ers have been like the little girl in the fable. They pick off the petals in the flower and they say, I love you not, I love you, I love you not. There are times this season where they've all loved each other. There are times this season where they've all hated each other. But with 2 rounds to go as we record today, that they look set to at least make the play-in. And they've got a couple of really key names under contract for next season.
They do. I mean, you've got one of the best local shooters in Vasiljevic, one of the best local big men in Isaac Humphries, who in recent weeks has been unbelievable, especially on the defensive end, to help them really change their entire season. So those are some key names to, again, build around. We spoke about this at the end of last season too, though. So they had those guys locked in for multi-year deals. So this is a great starting point. Now you just fit these pieces around. This seems like, I know we spoke about it in episode 1, that the desire to keep Kendrick Davis here long term, which makes sense. He's been unbelievable. But it seems like it's also one of those, whenever their season ends, and they're playing really well, so it could be a while from now, but it's one of those deep breaths where, okay, that season's done and gone. Let's just relax and let's really go back and look at where we went wrong, what went right, and then let's evaluate it from there. If they get Kendrick Davis long-term deal sorted, that changes the landscape of what's going to happen going forward, what pieces you put around these key 3, because you also look at some of the guys who are out. I'm looking at Sunday Detch and Lat Mayen, who you've got 2 key guys, 2 key contributors that maybe could really be beneficial to bring back there, or are they going to be wanting more of an opportunity elsewhere? It's tough.
Well, I think the past few weeks and rounds have really highlighted the value of Desh in their lineup. He gives them defense, enough of an offensive punch where teams have to pay attention to him and not be able to focus and load up on their other outstanding offensive players. And it's just that piece that's a bit more selfless, not knocking the other guys as being selfish. Those guys are so talented that they feel like they can do whatever they want with the basketball. But to get Davis signed up really gives you a strong 3 with Vasiljevic, Humphries, and Davis. And now you've got versatility when you go out to the marketplace.
Yeah, Kendrick Davis is the priority. Obviously, they want to lock him in for multiple seasons. And once they do that, I think in a similar way to the Sydney Kings, where you've seen what this looks like to an extent, where you've seen what Kendrick Davis, Dejan Vasiljevic, and Isaac Humphries look like on the floor, and how do we make sure that we complement them to the best of our abilities. You have Montrezl Harrell there right now. It's the fit has been somewhat clunky just by nature of him being a 5-man who's playing the 4, doesn't really stretch it, and so then Isaac Humphries has to sort of maneuver how he puts himself and impacts basketball, just by nature of Montrezl Harrell being there. Now, I'm told that Montrez he's guided by loyalty to an extent, so he hasn't ruled out a return to Adelaide. But I do think Adelaide will look at the entire picture and think, what is a fit that works maybe a little bit cleaner there than Montrez? And then I know that they have an intent to negotiate an extension with Lat Mayen. They'd like to get that done. They've expressed interest in bringing Sunday Detch back. Now, Sunday Detch will have options elsewhere. If he returns to Adelaide, he would have to take a pay cut of some sort because he's on the last season of a pretty substantial contract. But they'd like to keep him, and if they do that, then they have the core of what's been a really good basketball team over the course of the last 6 or 7 weeks. If they do that, then they're potentially a really good team again. But locking in Kendrick is priority number 1.
Pete, if Montrezl Harrell does want to come back, as Olgun said, they found a way to make it work with Humphries and Montrez this season. Is it an ongoing situation, or if Montrez wants to come back to the NBL, should he potentially look at a better fit?
Well, I think a lot of it, again, is going to be played out over the next few weeks. Because if this team continues where they're at, defensively they've been unbelievable the last few weeks, and I think the defense is going to hold a lot of weight in the finals. But if they go deep, if they get to a semi-final series, go to 3 games in that, if they get even to a championship series, to show what they can do, that becomes enticing too. And again, from all reports, what we just see from Montrez, again, the joy in the post-game press conferences, on the court with the interviews, a lot of his social media, he talks about feeling the love from the fans, not just in Adelaide, when he goes on the road. So all of that will hold weight. But again, all these players are competitors and they want to win at all costs. So now that they are actually winning ball games and looking one of the deadliest teams in the league, well, it becomes a bit more enticing of, hey, we could run this back, let's just figure out ways to get it done. But I think then it would come with key. They need some veterans on that team then. If they're running it back, what key veterans are out there? What guys are going to be able to do a job vocally, leadership, where it's going to be all of that behind closed doors? That's a key thing as well.
And 2 things. The first on Montrez, I can't see him playing for another NBL team. We've seen how effective and how productive he is as an offensive player in the NBL. And over the past, again, 5 or 6 weeks, what Adelaide is doing defensively, like, okay, this is a team that can maybe function going forward if you do run it back with this group. He will have interest. He's got interest across the world. Whether he does that, obviously, once you're in Australia, you really enjoy being in Australia. Again, if he stays here, I think it's in Adelaide. And then you make a good point on who's contracted down the bench? That's been an issue with this Adelaide team all season. Their depth. They play like 7.5 guys right now, and that's probably what they're going to play for the remainder of the season. So you have Nick Marshall, who has a team option, but I think they allow him to sort of go spread his wings somewhere else. But then they do have Ben Christie, Keanu Rasmussen, and they have a team option of Jacob Rigoni, which I expect them to pick up. So that's 3 guys at the end of your bench. That means that whomever you recruit as the rest of your bench need to be really high-level impact players, because those 3, it's still a question on whether they can impact NBL games consistently. So it's not just about making sure that you lock in Kendrick Davis for the multiple seasons and making sure you build a team around that core now. It's also making sure that the role players you do recruit are ready to make an impact from day one.
So that's their team. The coach is the other side of things, Derek. It very nearly came apart about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and Mike Wells was nearly for a brief second out of Adelaide. And as I say, they're on the same page right now. Do you see him coaching this team next year?
I don't think so, and I watched them pretty closely on the weekend. I watched the interaction between Kendrick Davis and Mike Wells, and it all appeared cheery on the day. We don't know the depth of that. If they're able just to keep it confined to the basketball court, it's hard to understand like how that's going to manifest over the rest of the season. But is Mike Wells and Kendrick Davis, are they capable of existing for 2-3 years together? Because ultimately, that's what you're probably trying to decide. And I don't know. I just don't know if Wells is the guy there. It doesn't mean that he's not a capable coach. We see it all the time with players. Good players come here and don't excel. Doesn't mean they're a bad player. Sometimes the fit is improper.
It's hard to really answer that until we see what happens in the next few weeks. Because if they run the table from the 6th spot and win a championship, then you look at the last 2.5 months and, okay, this all worked. How do we all make this work then in the future? Let's try and run it back. If they get bounced in the first playing game, well, is the whole season a failure? So much to play out in that.
Even when they had that blow up, I was like, well, wait a minute. Mike Wells, you have a player that is excelling under you. That is something that is hard to get in basketball. And Kendrick, you have a coach that is allowing you probably to play the best basketball of your life. You're an MVP candidate in one of the best leagues in the world. You guys got to figure it out, man. You got to be professional and understand the value that the two of you have with each other.
There is a relationship there between Kendrick Davis and Mike Wells that does need mending. How long that takes, I don't know. But if you're this team, there is a chance, I wouldn't say it's a high chance, but there's a chance you may have to make a decision there between Kendrick Davis and Mike Wells. Now, if they mend their relationship and everything is great going forward, then that's awesome. Then you hopefully can contract Kendrick Davis and then you have Mike Wells contracted. But if not, you might have to make a decision. And who do you pick? Do you pick your head coach, or do you pick this guy who I think a lot of us would say is an obvious All-NBL first-team guy and arguably the most productive player in the NBL?
Olgun, I think the onus in this dynamic is on Mike Wells to go to management or the owner or whoever and say, you know what, I can make this work.
And he's doing that.
Yeah.
From what I understand, he's taking proactive steps in mending these relationships with everybody.
And whatever personal growth or coaching growth is required, and we got to keep in mind, this is essentially his first head coaching gig at the elite level. So he's learning. It doesn't matter how old you are. When you get in that hot seat for the first time, the world's a different place. And if he has the maturity to be understanding of what it takes to deal with volatile athletes, high-performing athletes, and he thinks he can be a better coach as a result of it, then potentially we look at Mike Wells returning.
Just throwing it out there, there's a coach in this league right now who used to deal with prisoners, who's pretty used to dealing with volatile characters. I'm serious when I say that I think Adam Ford would be a wonderful fit for the Adelaide 36ers.
I'll say this. I don't know if the 36ers want to continue bouncing off different coaches every season. They do want to create some continuity. And that's also where you give Mike Wells some level of grace in that he's come into an Adelaide 36ers team that every season I've covered this league has just been a bit noisy and a bit dramatic, bringing in a player like Montrezl Harrell, who is a very passionate gentleman. And so you give Mike Wells some grace in saying, this is a very difficult situation to be the head coach of. And over the past 5 or 6 weeks, he's doing a good job keeping everything together. We'll see if it lasts, how long it lasts, and whether the Adelaide 36ers want to sustain that. But all of that context is important in that situation.
Let's finish off with some names to watch at the younger end of the scale. We started the show yesterday by talking about the biggest names to watch. We should never ignore the college names to watch, Olgun, because we had an influx of college guys come back to the league this season. The names on the screen right now are of interest for different reasons. And let's start with Ryan Smith, who's been in the news a little bit lately. Had that massive game for Louisville a couple of weeks ago where he knocked down 10 threes in a game.
He's the one that a lot of teams are looking at. And when I speak with teams around the league, they're curious of what his role might be in year one as a pro. A lot of people prior to 2 weeks ago were thinking, all right, hopefully we can DP this guy. Maybe we can DP +1 him. And now we're getting to a point where it's like, is this a rotation guy in the NBL? That's probably where he ends up fitting. You think he's 6'2", is the size there? Can he guard at a high level? But he's doing this for a high major. He's producing at a high level, shooting at a really efficient clip. Shooting is at a premium. You look at some of the free agents around the league, anyone who's around that 36 to 50% three-point shooter on a decent amount of volume, they're guys who teams are looking at and thinking, we can slot you in here and you could help our team win basketball games. Ryan Smith is sort of that guy too.
We saw that with like Elijah Pepper too, right? And even Taron Armstrong, he came out after 2 years. But guys who can come in and make somewhat of an impact straight away, they are hard. Kyle Bowen coming back. I know NBL teams really wanted to get Alex Dukas. That didn't eventuate, signing the two-way deal with OKC. Oscar Clough's a big one. No pun intended. But rebounding-wise, you talk about having guys who can contribute right away in terms of being ready to, in whatever impact that is. It's very rare you're going to have those college guys who aren't going to go to the NBA come in and start and even be like 6th or 7th man. It's how do they develop over the course of a year so that by the time it's year 2, this is a guy who can really contribute, whether it's on the glass, whether it's defensively, whether it's shooting, and that's a fascinating one.
Well, we talk about the importance of defense, and a core element of being good defensively is being able to clear the glass. And he is someone who is an outstanding rebounder, and rebounding generally across levels is transferable.
Similar for Harrison Hornery. He good rebounder, shoots it well. He's 6'10". I'm sure he's of interest to a few teams.
Yeah, you look at any big man. So you look at Oscar Clough, you look at Harrison Hornery, his time at USC. Oscar Clough at South Dakota State averages 17 and 12, right? There aren't many local backup bigs, right? And it's very difficult to fill that position. You look at the Sydney Kings right now. They have Jason Spurgeon coming in next season, but they could probably use a backup big. I think the Phoenix could probably use a backup big. The Brisbane Bullets, they've been without Tassie. These guys have been without quality bigs, and so it's very difficult to see who's out there. You look at who's going to be on the free agent market. You've got names like Dane Pinot. We'll see what Gorjok Gak's option is with regard to whether Tassie takes that. But getting a high quality local backup is at a premium in the NBL. That's why someone like Harry Froling is maybe in line to have a comeback, because getting any sort of depth in that position is really important, and I think Clough and Hornery are two of those guys.
So that brings us to an end. It's been a very, very big couple of episodes here on the Marketplace, but we're underway, and as we said right off the top of episode number 1, these conversations are already happening. They're going on behind the scenes right now. Great work to the three of you. It's a lot of work to put all of these names on paper and prepare, so great work. And what happens next it's going to be the fun part of the year.
It's going to be exciting, and man, I can't wait. We've got so much to just kind of get done over the next 2 or 3 months. It's a fascinating time.
Yeah, there'll probably be some extensions done by the time we meet again, and then the free agency will open, and it'll be chaos.
A lot of local movement, potentially guys coming back. Let's do it. I'm excited.
NBL.com.au. It's the place for all the latest news and information. Of course, you can follow Olgun on Twitter and all of his socials as well to stay up to date with the latest news as it happens. And Halls' hearing, of course.
I'll try, and by the way, take the tag off and return that shirt. That's fresh out the bag as well.
Wow.
He's done a good job of that.
Okay.
Well, he wanted to look his best for Marketplace, and we appreciate that he did. And we appreciate you watching. We will be back very, very soon as it all starts to hot up with free agency. The Marketplace is where you need to be.